Every week, the Payne family cuts straight to the real financial story.
The one question, Bob, everyone's asking is, are we in an artificial intelligence bubble? You've been through boom and bust. What do you think?
No hype, no myths. Just what actually matters to your money.
Does feel very similar to what we experienced in the 90s. Where are we, though? Are we in 1995, 1997, 1999?
Listen to the Pain Points of Wealth on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
You are now entering the Stone Zone. It is so incredibly good to be back in the saddle, back in the zone. I was sidelined by 4 days of laryngitis. Deep appreciation to my colleague, the great Greg Kelly, for filling in for me. Greg Kelly, once again, made my 17th annual International Best Dressed list. One more year, and I'm going to have to move Greg Kelly to the Hall of Fame, the fashion icon category, along with our mutual colleague, Larry Kudlow. Also, last Friday, January 9th, I was not able to join you, but it was the birthday of, one of our greatest American presidents, Richard Milhouse Nixon. You know, Nixon, the guy who got a strategic arms limitation agreement with the Soviets, who ended the war in Vietnam on a much faster timetable than the Pentagon wanted. The man who launched the program for federal revenue sharing. The president who integrated the public schools without incident or tragedy. The president who opened the door to China at a time that China was a backwards, deeply poor agrarian society without indoor plumbing or electricity. There was no way for Richard Nixon to know that 30 years later, President Bill Clinton would give them most favored nation trading status, which has made them the danger to the world that they are today. So happy birthday, Richard Nixon, 113 years old last Friday. I really regretted not being on the air that day. Tonight's show opens with sad news. Scott Adams, the creator of the iconic Dilbert cartoon strip and one of America's most influential cultural commentators, who's been a guest here in the Stone Zone several times, died at the age of 68. The announcement was made Tuesday morning by his ex-wife and caregiver, Shelley Miles, who shared this final message that I now bring to you. Scott Adams said, "If you're reading this, things did not go well for me. I have a few things to say before I go. My body fell before my brain. I am of sound mind as I write this on January 1st, 2026. If you wonder about any of my choices for my estate or anything else, please know I am free of any inappropriate influence of any sort. I promise you that. Next, many of my Christian friends have suggested to me that I find Jesus before I go. Now, I have not been a believer. I have to admit the risk-reward calculation for doing so is attractive to me, so here I go. I accept Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, and I look forward to spending an eternity with Him. The part about me not being a believer should be quickly resolved. If I wake up in heaven, I won't need any more convincing than that. I hope I'm still qualified for entry." Now, I think that if you declare Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, as I have done, and by the way, I've been roasted by the Washington Monthly for professing my faith publicly, but I was baptized as a Roman Catholic. I received my first Holy Communion and my confirmation, baptized at St. Mary's Church in Norwalk, Connecticut, one of the most beautiful Catholic churches in the northeastern United States. Received my first Holy Communion at St. Aloysius, same place I was confirmed, St. Aloysius in New Canaan, Connecticut. And I admit to you, I wandered very far from the Lord. In my heyday as a powerful Washington lobbyist and power broker, I did some truly crazy things I now regret, things I have atoned for. But your declaration of Christ as your Savior has to be sincere. And I hope, because I loved Scott Adams, I loved his humor, I loved having him as a guest, I hope that his was sincere and that he now rests with the Lord in all eternity. Best known for skewering corporate absurdity through his comic strip Dilbert, Scott Adams brought laughter to millions of Americans navigating cubicles, bureaucracy, and managerial nonsense in soulless corporate America. What began as a comic strip back in 1989 evolved into a short critique of modern professional life and a reminder to laugh at systems that often take themselves way too seriously. In later years, Scott Adams' journey took an ideological turn. He became a best-selling author, most notably with his book How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big, and a daily commentator through Real Coffee with Scott Adams, a great show. He stood out for his outspoken support for President Donald Trump, correctly predicting Trump's 2016 victory when very few others ventured forward to say so. Adams always maintained his independent, skeptical mindset, however, was never a follower, always expressed his honest opinion for better or for worse, and had the courage to dissent. In short, he was a great American, and his is a great story. For his legacy, Scott Adams asked only one thing, that others pay it forward, be useful, and live generously. And hopefully his conversion to Christianity will inspire others to accept Jesus Christ as their Savior, remembering that you may not have the opportunity to do so on your deathbed. So, Scott Adams, my friend, may you rest in peace. Former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton are now refusing to testify before congressional investigators over their connections to the deceased pedophile predator Jeffrey Epstein. The Clintons were subpoenaed by Committee Chairman James Comer of Kentucky as part of an investigation into their documented interactions with the convicted sex trafficker Epstein and his pimp, Ghislaine Maxwell, including multiple flights aboard Epstein's private jet. Bill Clinton, if you look at my book, The Clintons' War on Women, published in 2015, was on the Lolita Express, as they called Jeffrey Epstein's private jet, no less than 27 times. And based on the sworn testimony that I have read from at least 3 of the cases of women who refused multi-million-dollar settlements to press forward with lawsuits against Epstein, plus the FAA manifests, which I published in my 2015 book, Bill Clinton was on the island at least 3 times. This all in the face of claims until recently by Bill Clinton that he'd never been on the island. That was a lie. And, by the way, Ghislaine Maxwell, who also vouched for that only months ago. Instead, hours before the deadline, the Clintons submitted an 8-page letter declaring Comer's subpoenas invalid and legally unenforceable and vowing to resist compliance indefinitely. Now, I'm not a fan of Steve Bannon. We'll talk about that in a little bit. I do like Peter Navarro, the president's former and once again trade advisor. But when both of them refused to testify before the House, they were charged, convicted, and jailed for contempt. So do we have a one-tiered justice system, or do we have a 2-tiered justice system? You see the same thing in the case of Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. Now, I was charged with lying under oath to Congress, despite the fact that no misstatement I made was material, meaning I had no motive to lie because there was no underlying crime to lie about. The judge said at my sentencing, "You have been convicted of covering up for Donald Trump," to which I say, covering up what? The Russian collusion that didn't exist, that never happened? Now, Jerome Powell very specifically lied before the U.S. Senate on the question of the $3.1 billion renovation of the palatial headquarters for the Federal Reserve. He specifically said that development plan had no private elevators for the Federal Reserve Board governors, no private dining room, no lush roof garden with a special atrium. All those things were material lies that involve literally millions of dollars that belong to the American taxpayers. It's amazing that the heads of the central banks in countries around the world have all stepped forward to support Jerome Powell. To which I say, what business is it of theirs? It doesn't matter whether he's the chairman of the Federal Reserve, an appointed position. It doesn't matter whether he's used that position politically. See, he's the one who's political, because based on the current rate of inflation and based on the current rate of unemployment, Donald Trump deserved, and the country should have had, a much deeper interest rate cut. So it's not Powell playing it's not Trump playing politics, it's Powell playing politics. Anyway, the House committee has now initiated contempt of Congress proceedings against Bill and Hillary. Contempt of Congress carries a penalty of up to $100,000 in fines and a year in jail if enforced by the Justice Department, although critics note such charges are rarely pursued, unless, of course, you're a Trump-supporting Republican, in which case they're pursued very vigorously. The refusal comes weeks after the Trump Justice Department released its first round of Epstein files, documents that prominently reference Bill Clinton. So rather than cooperate, the Clintons have assembled a high-powered legal team in an attempt to skirt justice. In their letter, the Clintons accused Comer of conducting a politically motivated investigation designed to imprison them, claim they're now prepared to fight for this country by defying the U.S. Congress. I think they just described exactly what they tried to do to Donald Trump. So they're now hoist on their own petard, as they say. The Trump Justice Department should initiate criminal charges against the Clintons for contempt of Congress. They must be held accountable for any potential participation in Jeffrey Epstein's child sex network, as well as the other hosts of crimes they're guilty of, whether it's Whitewater, Russiagate, Vince Foster's death, Seth Rich, or you name it. When we come back, I have a good laugh over the fact that Stinky Steve Bannon says he's running for president. First of all, this guy doesn't look like he can run. He doesn't look like he's done a sit-up or seen his own feet in 30 years. But despite the fact that he rarely bathes, doesn't shave, he kind of has the toothless hobo look down pat. He now wants us to believe he's running for president. By doing so, I think he exposes the fact that it's he that had a very close working relationship with Jeffrey Epstein after Epstein was convicted of sex crimes in Florida and before he was re-indicted for child sex trafficking in 2019. So I'll have a lot more to say about Steve Bannon and his nascent bid for the presidency, if I can stop laughing that long. I'm Roger Stone. You're back in the Stone Zone. It's great to be back in the saddle again, and please don't go away, because we'll be right back.
Every week, the Payne family cuts straight to the real financial story.
The one question, Bob, everyone's asking is, are we in an artificial intelligence bubble? You've been through boom and bust. What do you think?
No hype, no myths. Just what actually matters to your money.
Does feel very similar to what we experienced in the 90s. Where are we, though? Are we in 1995, 1997, 1999?
Listen to the Pain Points of Wealth on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
The Stone Zone. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. I can't tell you how much I appreciate those warm words from Vice President J.D. Vance. Evidently, Vance has a new challenger for the Republican nomination in 2028. The megalomaniacal narcissist Steve Bannon thinks he's running for president. This news surprises nobody who knows, who's been following this lunatic. Bannon has always seen himself, not President Donald Trump, as the top dog in the MAGA movement. Back in 2019, 2020, Bannon was positive that Trump was guilty of Russian collusion. At least that's what he told the author Michael Wolff. And Bannon was planning his 2020 campaign that never happened. Now, I've got a real beef with Bannon. For those who don't know, he perjured himself in his testimony against me at my trial, saying one thing before the House Intelligence Committee under oath, where he claimed that he had never discussed WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, or the allegedly stolen emails with me, and then completely reversing himself on the stand at my trial, where he showed up as a surprise witness for Robert Mueller. There he said that he and I had discussed WikiLeaks and Julian Assange and the allegedly stolen emails in every phone conversation we had in 2016. By the way, I took a lie detector test. In fact, I took 3 tests that proved that was not true. So Bannon was basically trying to throw me over the side, paint me as a criminal and part of a likely deal to save his own hide. You see, he stole $15 million from the We Build the Wall project, a federal crime that President Trump pardoned him for, and then he was re-indicted in New York State. It was supposed to go to trial in Manhattan before the very same judge as President Trump, and strangely enough, Bannon pled guilty to that theft and received a sentence of no jail time from a liberal Democrat judge. I really hope Bannon does go through with it and runs for president in 2028, and here's why. You see, he has nowhere to hide. Right now, Bannon hides in a tightly controlled echo chamber, barking at loyal podcast listeners who never even ask him hard questions. But put him on a debate stage under bright lights, shoulder to shoulder with real candidates, although I doubt he can get on the ballot in most states, and there's nowhere to run. The record's clear. After Jeffrey Epstein's crimes were known, after the world understood the depths of Epstein's depravity, Bannon still sought him out, not accidentally, not casually, but deliberately. Bannon wasn't some naive bystander. He was advising Epstein, strategizing with him, helping him to plot image rehabilitation, discussing ways to demonize Epstein's victims as part of a morally bankrupt image consulting scheme. All of this is proven in the emails that were recently released by the House Oversight Committee. The emails show Bannon coordinating puff piece documentary efforts, arranging access to Epstein's private island, and responding approvingly to claims that President Trump feared his friendship with the sex predator. This wasn't journalism. This was a desperate, disgraced slob doing damage control for a mobster who destroyed lives. This is in no way comparable to President Donald Trump, who cut ties with Epstein way back in 2004 and banned him from Mar-a-Lago and all of his properties once it became known that Epstein was a pedophile. Bannon did the exact opposite. He moved closer to Epstein where others ran away. So if Steve Bannon thinks he's going to crown himself as the prophet of populism post-Trump, he should understand this. His Epstein record will be fair game front and center. And no amount of bluster, podcasts, or fake bravado will prevent Steve Bannon from being exposed on the grandest of stages. Vanity will be Steve Bannon's downfall, and I'm going to pursue this bloated, gin-soaked windbag because he has the gall to go through a presidential bid. I will be there to ask the hard questions. When we come back, Iran is and the brutal regime there is teetering on the brink of destruction. We need to pray for that. We'll talk about it when we return to the Stone Zone. So please don't go away.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And we're back in the Stone Zone. I'm so happy to be back with you after 5 days in a sickbed, but a strict regimen of vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, which makes the vitamin C more effective, bed rest, and a lot of water. And I'm back on my feet and feeling fit as a fiddle. Iran stands at a historic inflection report right now, one whose consequences really go far beyond the Middle East. To understand today's unrest, Americans should recall a truth often forgotten, and that is before 1979, Iran was a modern, forward-looking nation. Tehran was a cosmopolitan city of universities, commerce, and culture. Iranian women dressed freely, were allowed to be educated, students studied abroad in the country, while most definitely imperfect under the Shah, who was very far from an exemplar of human rights, to be sure, was nonetheless oriented towards development and engagement with the West. That path ended in 1979 with the Iranian Revolution, when radical clerics led by Ayatollah Khomeini overthrew the monarchy and imposed a theocratic regime rooted in religious absolutism. This is one of the most brutal regimes in the history of the world. President Jimmy Carter, the peanut farmer from Georgia, who I think lacked any level of sophistication when it came to international affairs, betrayed our longtime ally, the Shah, President Richard Nixon predicted that this day would come. He saw this coming. He pointed out, in his words, that the new Iranian government was not a government, but a mob. So this was not a revolution of freedom, but a revolution of repression. Almost immediately, the new rulers defined the United States as their chief enemy. You'll recall, culminated in the 1979 seizure of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. 52 Americans were held hostage for 445 days in a calculated act of state-sponsored terrorism that signaled how the regime would rule, through intimidation and spectacle, not to mention brutality. From that revolution emerged the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, now the most powerful force in Iran. The IRGC dominates large parts of the economy, enforces domestic repression, and directs terrorist proxies across the region. Its mission is not national defense, but regime survival and the export of Islamist national defense. But U.S. allies and allied sanctions aim to cut off the system from global finance and deny it resources for terror and nuclear ambitions have been successful. And today the regime teeters on the brink of collapse because the quality of life, the availability and cost of food, the availability of jobs, the safety of neighborhoods no longer exists. The greatest victims, sadly, are the ordinary Iranians who increasingly reject clerical rule. Across the country now, women, students, and workers protest corruption, repression, and the economic ruin that the Ayatollahs have brought. Despite the brutal crackdowns, the demonstrations continue. That is what impresses me the most, the incredible courage of the Iranian people, because this is a brutal regime. They have done mass public executions of their political opponents. And the brutality of the regime and the severity of their secret police cannot be underestimated. History shows why no regime can endure forever once it governs only by fear. What we're witnessing in Iran is not a passing disturbance, but the slow erosion of a system that has lost the consent of its people and a nation determined to reclaim its future. President Trump clearly supporting the resistance. The time is now to send the Islamic dictatorship into the ash bin of history. Now, there are those who have advocated a return of the Shah's son and a restoration of the House of Pahlavi. I'll get 1,000 trolls attacking me on social media right after the program, but I don't think going from theocracy back to a monarchy is the answer. The people of Iran need democratic elections and freedom, and we all pray for that result. Now we know that Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, the Somalian immigrant, is facing renewed scrutiny after lawmakers uncovered a proposed earmark directing more than $1 million of our tax money to a little-known Somali-led addiction recovery organization that apparently shares an address with a restaurant. The controversy resurfaced this week as Congress unveiled a massive $174 billion spending package. Senator Joni Ernst, a Republican of Iowa, identified a $1,031,000 earmark. That's a piece of legislation put forward by a very specific legislator for a very specific source, routed through the Department of Justice for an organization called Generation Hope Minnesota. The request was included alongside funding proposals co-led by Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, a woman who combs her hair with buttered toast, and the other senator who I've never heard of and couldn't identify in a police lineup, Tina Smith. According to Ernst, the earmark was described as funding for a substance abuse clinic. However, her staff found the group was operating out of the same address as a Somali restaurant, with leadership tied to a single residential home. Ernst said the situation has a ton of red flags and said that Congress ultimately stripped the funding from the bill. Generation Hope Minnesota, founded in 2019, describes itself as serving East African communities in the Twin Cities. Reporting indicates the organization listed multiple addresses, including one matching the restaurant location, raising further questions about transparency and oversight. Senator Ernst says she is now working to redirect the funds towards federal fraud prevention efforts, warning that Minnesota has become a hot spot for misuse of federal dollars, almost all of it flowing to its large proportion of Somali residents. Subsequently, Omar made headlines over the weekend after joining protests outside a Minneapolis Immigration and Customs Enforcement facility where she was reportedly denied entry while attempting to confront federal agents. It's no surprise why Ilhan Omar is fighting against an investigation into the Somali community. She's a product of Somali fraud, having been exposed for marrying her own brother as part of the immigration fraud scheme that allowed her to enter the United States and become a U.S. citizen. And it has been alleged that she embezzled money through a consulting grift with her now lily-white husband. Ilhan Omar is a testimony to the fruits of diversity and multiculturalism and what it brings to our nation. It's time to send her back to Somalia or Sudan or Burundi or any place that will actually take her. Meanwhile, the Colorado Governor Jared Polis is considering whether to grant clemency to County Clerk Tina Peters, the former county clerk currently serving a 9-year prison sentence over bogus election fraud charges. Tina Peters' crime was making a copy of records that would prove that the vote in Colorado had been manipulated. And for that crime, she was given a brutal 9-year sentence. Tina Peters has also appeared here in the Stone Zone. She is a good friend of mine, and she is in poor health and declining health. I think it is imperative that she be released. There is a glimmer of hope here. Speaking with CBS Colorado on last Wednesday, Governor Polis, a Democrat, described Peters' sentence as harsh and said the state routinely reviews lengthy prison terms, particularly for elderly inmates, to determine whether they pose a threat to public safety. Tina Peters is in her 70s and a cancer survivor, factors that the governor acknowledged while stopping short of committing to any specific action. This case has drawn national attention after President Trump publicly criticized Polis and called for Peters' release. Trump has repeatedly described Peters as a political prisoner, noting she was targeted for questioning election integrity. In a New Year's Eve post on Truth Social, Trump said Peters is sick and being held in a Colorado maximum security prison for trying to expose what he called widespread voter fraud. Last year, President Trump requested that the governor transfer Peters into federal custody so she could receive a presidential pardon. Polis refused, and although Trump later issued a pardon, it carries no legal effect on Peters' state conviction. And that is why this poor woman continues to languish in a harsh Colorado state prison. Peters was sentenced in 2024 following a jury verdict that found her guilty on multiple counts related to an alleged data breach tied to the election systems. Basically, she was prosecuted because she wanted to investigate what was in the mysterious ballot processing computers. She was made into a cruel example by the courts as part of the still ongoing cover-up of the 2020 presidential election, which I and many others believe was stolen. An issue of clemency from Governor Polis would be the decent and moral thing to do, but it will take political courage, as he will certainly receive pushback from his radicalized left-wing Democrat constituents. The people must make their voices heard, urging the governor to do what is right, and please grant clemency to Tina Peters. God bless her and keep her as this plays out. Meanwhile, the January 6th Capitol Police Gestapo thug came forward and suggested that ICE officers working for ICE, should be shot. Michael Fanone, a member of Nancy Pelosi's Capitol Gestapo on January 6th, who went on a crying victim tour for the cameras after the Fed insurrection, is now suggesting that ICE agents should be shot. During a recent appearance on MSNBC, Fanone said, "This ain't even the first time that someone has been seriously injured or lost their lives. I appreciate the foul language coming out of the mouths of the mayor of Minneapolis. I think that his sentiment in the moment was appropriate. That being said, what are you doing? What are you doing to keep me safe? What do you do to keep my mother safe, my sister safe, my community safe from these thugs? That's what I need to hear coming out of these agents or these officers, because if you're not going to do it, then it's time for the American people to organize and utilize their Second Amendment right to protect themselves from what has clearly become an unaccountable and lawless agency that's killing Americans. See, this is very typical on the left. This is what's called Alinskyism, named after the famous communist operative and agitator Saul Alinsky. Those on the left always accuse those on the right of doing exactly that which they themselves are doing. So ICE agents are trying to arrest and report violent, dangerous, non-resident criminals. And that is the only way that America will become safer again. So Fanon has a history of making these hysterical, inflammatory attacks against President Trump, even once comparing him to the alleged 9/11 mastermind Osama bin Laden, not to mention, of course, Adolf Hitler. Here's one of Stone's rules. Anytime your political opponent in debate brings up Adolf Hitler, it means they're losing the debate. Since the death of Antifa activist and far-left agitator Renee Good in a Minneapolis ICE shooting, the left has accused the federal officer who shot her of murder. They want this ICE officer's head on a pike, but it's not 2020 and the summer of love anymore, when Black Lives Mattered, Antifa burned down a quarter of America. The Trump administration standing by the ICE agents. They're refusing to back down. Now, I've watched this video again and again and again. It's very clear to me that this woman Renee Good attempted to run down and kill an ICE agent who was very clearly in her path. It doesn't matter what the New York Times says on page 1. The New York Times is not a journalistic enterprise, nor it is a news outlet. It is a propaganda sheet for the American left. If it's in the New York Times, there's a 98% chance that what you're reading is neither true nor accurate. And in this particular case, it is very clear that, egged on by her husband, a woman who was filming the entire incident, Renee Good tried to kill an ICE agent using a motor vehicle as her weapon. And therefore, although the fact that she is shot is unfortunate, it was also done in self-defense. Trump administration is refusing to back down. Expect even more deranged responses from the left. They're an existential threat to our constitutional republic. They're more of a threat to our safety and security than ISIS, and sadly, they must be treated as such. You're listening to the Stone Zone. I'm Roger Stone. Whatever you do, don't touch that dial, or keep listening to us online, because we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. I am so happy to be back with you after 5 days in a sick bed. Now, I'm not a doctor and I don't dispense medical advice, but the fact that I was able to go to allfamilypharmacy.com and get a legal and swift prescription for ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine combined with my vitamin regimen and bed rest is the reason that I'm back with you. Allfamilypharmacy.com. Check it out. Use code STONE10 if you do, but it is an excellent resource, particularly this time of year when there are so many people sick. It's so cold. There are so many germs. I think that's what got me. After Donald Trump decisively removed the Venezuelan strongman Nicolas Maduro and pursued U.S. charges against him, leftist leaders across Latin America are now scrambling. Few appear more rattled than the outgoing Honduran President Xiomara Castro, once one of the region's loudest anti-Trump voices. For years, Castro threatened to block cooperation on illegal immigration, tried to end the extradition agreement with the United States, and even expel U.S. forces from Honduras. Now, after her party not just lost a presidential election, but came in a poor third, and their gambit of taking her vice president and running him as a third party candidate, as the Liberal Party candidate, Salvador Nasrallah. This guy has one of the worst toupees I've ever seen in politics, by the way. That little trick in New York, we call that a ringer. It didn't work, and Tito Asfura, the Nationalist Party, narrowly won that election. Asfura is strongly pro-American and pro-Trump and anti-narco trafficking. Yes, I have seen substantial evidence that the current Marxist Honduran regime engages in the same type of narco drug trafficking that the Venezuelan strongman Nicolas Maduro and his allies engaged in. I've turned all that information over to the U.S. Justice Department. Now suddenly, Xiomara Castro, the outgoing president, is calling for a dialogue with President Trump, while at the same time trying to cast doubt on the election results that didn't go her way. This election was won by the National Party candidate, Tito Asfura, whose victory was actually certified by Honduras' nonpartisan National Electoral Council and are recognized by U.S. authorities such as the Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Nations across the region have also recognized Tito Asfura as the president-elect, with countries like Argentina, Bolivia, Ecuador, Paraguay, and Peru releasing a joint statement rejecting the games being played by the Castro regime. Meanwhile, Honduran military leadership has pledged to uphold the certified results, even as political violence linked to Castro's allies, including a recent bombing at the congressional offices where a National Party legislator was attacked, escalates. With an inauguration set for January 27th, the choice facing Honduras is clear. Either respect the will of the voters or allow a defeated, disgraced Marxist political faction to drag the country into chaos. The people of Honduras have had enough. They want freedom and to make their country great again. They also have allies in the Trump administration who are not afraid to take a swift and bold stand when freedom hangs in the balance, as seen recently in Venezuela. We are praying for a just result. And for those who say, it's hypocritical that Trump pardoned a narco-Marxist drug trafficker, Juan Orlando Hernandez, the former president of Honduras, at the same time he was arresting Maduro in Venezuela, you haven't studied the case, because it's clear that Hernandez was convicted solely and completely based on the testimony of two convicted drug traffickers and murderers, both of whom were extradited to the United States for trial and conviction by President Juan Orlando Hernandez. So this was about payback. Hernandez was framed, and any examination of that trial will show that the Biden Justice Department had no evidence of actual movement of drugs, no evidence of any financial transactions. This was a simple deal. Get two convicted drug traffickers, both of whom are mass murderers, release them permanently from their long prison sentences in return for false testimony against the Honduran president. That's the way the Biden Justice Department rolled. Thanks for joining us today on the Stone Zone. We're so happy to be back here on the Red Apple Audio Networks. Until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder, what the heck is going on here?
Every week, the Payne family cuts straight to the real financial story.
The one question, Bob, everyone's asking is, are we in an artificial intelligence bubble? You've been through boom and bust. What do you think?
No hype, no myths. Just what actually matters to your money.
Does feel very similar to what we experienced in the 90s. Where are we, though? Are we in 1995, 1997, 1999?
Listen to the Pain Points of Wealth on the Red Apple Podcast Network.